like the 6-year-old who decides after about an hour on Christmas morning that, you know what, getting this erector set to actually raise the drawbridge, I just can't do it, so I'm not going to play with it anymore. David Tepper has thrown back his Bryce Young doll, and we're going for the older, more tried and true Andy Dalton model. Julian Council, Locked On Panthers Podcast, joining us now on the Adam Gold Show. I don't know if that was a direct comparison, but that's the best I could come up with just off the top of my head.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair. That's what we're dealing with here in Carolina. It feels like every year we're in the same spot where the owner is tired of watching the quarterback. We saw it back in 2020 after 14 games. David Tepper had seen enough of Teddy Bridgewater. Then after 7 games, Matt Rule had seen enough of Sam Darnold as he was benched on the road against the Giants. And then they spent all offseason trying to get rid of him. Baker Mayfield came in. He barely lasts. And then Bryce Young, after 18 starts, appears to be done here in Carolina. So just this vicious cycle of just not having enough patience to see anything through at the quarterback continues here in Carolina. Thank you, David Tepper.
So I'll go back to questions I asked during the preseason. Would it not have helped to have seen against other second-string and third-string players, would it not have helped Dave Canales to actually see Bryce Young play more than the one cameo, oh, it worked out well, get him out before anything bad happens, performance against Buffalo?
I guess it's hard to really know at this point in time because what we saw from Bryce even in that cameo was not what we've seen from Bryce Young in the first 2 weeks of the season. What we saw from Bryce during a joint practice against the Jets first team is not what we've seen from him in the first 2 games of the regular season. So it's hard for me to know whether that was going to do anything because this guy does not look like he's confident, does not look like somebody who trusts the pocket, does not look like he trusts anything, and has any sort of ability at this point in time to help this football team out on the field. And it's not the same guy that we saw in the preseason in that one drive in Buffalo. It's not the same guy that we saw during joint practice or any of the training camp practices. I don't really know how they could have predicted this happening. I suppose they played more in the preseason, but again, Canales is out there every single day. If Bryce Young looked like this, which he didn't at least the days I was there, then of course he wouldn't have started. But he didn't look like this. So it just feels like I think everyone was caught off guard, in particular Dave Canales, just based off of the play that Bryce has had in the first 2 weeks.
Look, in a normal situation, if your quarterback plays as poorly as Bryce Young has played in these 2 weeks, I mean, it's not a controversial decision to bench that quarterback, especially when you have a veteran. And look, at this stage of the game, Andy Dalton is nothing more than a stopgap. He's just somebody who can come in and, you know, like if your quarterback's hurt, maybe win a game or two or get you out of a game or two, but he's not your answer. He hasn't been the answer going forward for about 7 years. But that was not the plan going into this season. The plan was to resurrect Bryce Young as a viable NFL quarterback. Is it even possible that they reached the decision that unsalvageable is their answer after 2 weeks?
It's certainly possible. I felt like after all that they did by firing Frank Reich after 11 games, firing Scott Fitterer, elevating Dan Morgan, that hallway elevation to be the general manager, hiring Dave Canales, who had done a wonderful job working with Baker Mayfield and with Geno Smith the last 2 years, and all they did by bringing in money or guys on the offensive line, spending that money on Robert Hunt and on Damian Lewis, trading for Deontay Johnson, trading up the Xavier Legette. I just not think that they did all of that just to bail after 2 weeks on Bryce Young. And if they're doing this, to me, it says that they don't believe in him anymore, or that they feel like they're going to lose the locker room. When we saw Adam Thielen, his frustration boil over. And it's not like Adam Thielen didn't have success with Bryce Young last year, so it is striking to see in week 2 how frustrated he was. So that's the only thing I can think of, that they either are done with Bryce Young or they felt like they're going to lose the locker room because looking at the offensive line's been fine. Pro Football Focus has them 5th in their pass blocking stats. The receivers were getting open. They've been able to run the ball when at least they've been committed to, which they have not been nearly as committed as I felt like they would be based off of what Dave Canales told us all off season. So that's where I think we're at, where they think they're going to lose the locker room, or they're just completely out on Bryce Young, or maybe this is just going to be a reset, which after the whole offseason, like that, it's hard to understand that would be a reset. It really feels like to me that they're just done with him. And right now, probably Andy Dalton gives them the best opportunity to win games, but they're still going to have trouble considering how bad the defense is.
Julian Council, Locked On Panthers Podcast, at Julian Council on Twitter, is joining us here in the Adam Gold Show. So something you said in the first half of the game, it became clear to me that they simply are refusing to do, and that is commit to a running game. And this is after the offseason where Dave Canales said, and he even used the hashtag keep pounding, we are going to commit to running the football. Every good quarterback, young quarterback, needs a good running game to work off of. So I will simply go to back-to-back plays. The first down in the entire game came with 4 minutes left in the first half. Chuba Hubbard went off the left side for 12 yards, whatever it was. And he turned to the sideline and he flexed and was emotional, and you could tell what he was doing. Let's keep running the ball. And the next play, not only wasn't it a run, there was no running back in the backfield. They split Chuba Hubbard out wide as a receiver. There was nobody who could even, on a jet sweep, run the ball. At that point, I went, no, they're not going to commit to running the ball. I don't think Dave Canales wants to commit to running the ball unless they were trying to get Bryce to fail.
Yeah, I don't understand it. They had 11 running back carries week 1 against the Saints, then 17 on Sunday in that game against the Chargers. And it's not like the game against New Orleans where they were down 17-0, 30-0 immediately, and you could understand why you would get away from the run game. Like when that's the first down you've had, it came on the 5th drive of the game, Adam. 5th drive of the game, right before halftime. He gets 12 yards, and like you mentioned, he's looking at the sideline, pumping people up, and basically telling them, like, I want the ball. It just, I don't understand. And I'm wondering now, with Bryce Young being benched, and Dave Canales, I assume, came here to fix Bryce Young based off of his previous work. It's not like anyone else in the NFL, remember, was trying to hire this guy to be their head coach. It made sense that he had a relationship with Dan Morgan dating back to their time in Seattle, and that he had done a great job with Baker and Geno, that he would be here. So I'm curious now what his standing is going to be after Bryce has regressed. We're looking at it. He was worse the last 2 weeks than he's ever been in the NFL, and that's been under Dave Canales. Dave talked all offseason about being stubborn about running the football. Clearly, that's not the case. 28 running back carries in 2 weeks. Does that make any sense to you with a struggling quarterback? It certainly does not to me. So I'm wondering what this means for him moving forward and what his offense is going to look like. So you can take Bryce Young out of the offense, but he's only had 1 year as a play caller. He's now going to be under the microscope after making this decision, if you believe it really was his decision, and seeing what he's able to do with the run game, if they are going to be dedicated to it moving forward, what they're going to do in the pass game with Andy Dalton. I think this is going to really put the microscope on him, and let's not put it past David Tepper and they make another change of a head coach in the middle of the season based off of what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I said this yesterday. I think Dave Canales has the most job security of anybody on a bad team in the NFL, because even Tepper can pretend that this was not his decision, right? He can say, well, they consulted me, and I said, you're the head coach, you do what you feel is best, even though we all kind of figure out that this is David Tepper's decision. But
there's no way David Tepper, who was the one who wanted them to get up to number 1 so that they could have all the attention for that 2-month period leading up to the draft, and the one who fell in love with Bryce Young in Tuscaloosa, him and his wife, when Bryce took them through all the details, minute by minute, second by second, hour by hour, his lead up to game day there in Tuscaloosa. There's no way the guy who wanted Bryce Young was going to sit there and let the coach he just hired to work with Bryce Young, to get Bryce Young to not be a distressed asset. There's no way that he had no say into what the Panthers did yesterday. Because look at Dave Canales, man. I needed him to blink twice to let us know he's okay. You look at the game on Sunday afterwards, he said twice, given 2 opportunities, he said twice, Bryce Young is our quarterback. 2 times he said it. Then less than 24 hours, we're getting reports from Tom Pelissero and all the NFL Network experts and insiders and Adam Schefter saying that Dave Canales is making this change and that this is his first big boy move, that he consulted Brant Tillis to the EVP of football operations and Dan Morgan, the general manager. And then you look at him yesterday speaking to the media, a guy who has been energetic, who's always been smiling, who has been looking at you intensely when he talks to you. He's a guy who didn't want to answer any questions.
Yeah.
So what happened?
He's broken.
What happened from yesterday and then today? Like, you can't just tell me you just watched the film, because that's a completely different Dave Canales that we've seen since we were first introduced to him way back in January. Like, I have to imagine that maybe you had a conversation with Tepper, which we found out last week. They had a conversation. So are the weekly conversations that he was having with Frank Reich continuing into the season? Makes me feel like yes.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I'm in full agreement that this was a Tepper decision. But and you understand, Tepper can pretend that it wasn't. If he fires the head coach, he can't pretend that it wasn't his decision unless we have like video of Dan Morgan duct taping David Tepper's mouth shut, tying him to a chair, and saying, "I am firing Dave Canales, whether you like it or not." Because the way you describe Tepper is somebody that clearly it matters to him what other people think about David Tepper, the owner. And right now, the entire football world is looking at David Tepper and going, that guy is too impatient. And if he justifies those feelings by firing another coach with 4 years and however many games left on his contract, all it does is it cements that opinion, and it makes it virtually impossible to hire a good replacement. I think Canales not only gets this year, but he would have to prove utterly incompetent next year to not get a third year. So I think Canales has wonderful job security, not to mention the guarantee of a 5-year contract. So let me ask you this as we have to say goodbye here in a second. Julian Council, Locked On Panthers Podcast. What's next? Andy Dalton isn't the long-term future. There's no quarterback in this draft that is a slam dunk. We must have this guy. They're going to have the first pick in this draft. And Bryce Young, they got to pay him for 2 more years. So what is next for the Panthers?
Yeah, great question. I remember I was talking about this last week. People were already wanting to bench Bryce Young, and I was telling him how it made no sense to put in Andy Dalton because he's not the future here in Carolina. It would make more sense to go see what you have in Jack Plummer, which I don't think they have anything in Jack Plummer, but it would make more sense to me if you're trying to find – because that's the thing. David Tepper has talked all the way back, dating back to December of 2020, when he held that press conference, when they mutually parted ways with Marty Herney. Roll your eyes at that, of course.
Yeah.
And he said you have to be in constant pursuit of a quarterback, telling us right then and there that 14 games in the season, 14 games in the Teddy Bridgewater, he was done and that they need to go find a quarterback. So here we are, right back to square one. And way back then, my whole feeling was once they move off the Cam, they brought in Teddy. You saw Luke Kuechly, you saw Mario Addison, you saw a lot of those defensive stalwarts in the years past leave, that the Panthers really need to just focus on building the overall roster. They need to focus on going out there and getting a quarterback. And as we have seen in these first 2 games, well, offensively, I feel like the offensive line has played well, and the running backs, when given an opportunity, have ran the ball well. The receivers have been open, haven't necessarily been given opportunity to make plays. The Panthers need to get something defensively because they are bereft of talent on that side of the ball, with Derek Brown out for the rest of the season, some aging guys that are there that they brought in just for about 1 or 2 years of stopgaps. They got to overhaul the entire defensive roster at some point. Yep. They got to bring in more talent. And offensively, while Thielen and Johnson is an upgrade of what they had last year, no one's afraid of Adam Thielen and Deontay Johnson in the NFL.
No.
This team a couple years ago had Christian McCaffrey and DJ Moore. Name me a single player on that offense who was of their caliber. Not a single one of them. So they really need to be focused on building the roster. So the best thing for them would honestly be for Dalton to, I guess, show that he's capable enough of running an offense this year. And hell, you want to bring him again next year? They should not be focused on getting a quarterback in the draft. They should be focused. If they're going to be one of the worst teams, they're going to be up at number 1 or 2, trade back, get more assets, recoup that, bring in more younger players who have talent, and then build your roster until you can actually drop in a quarterback where it makes sense, maybe in 26 or in 27. Like, it does not need to be something that happens now. And I know fans don't want to hear that, But that's what the Panthers have to do. They have to see something through, actually go through a rebuild the right way instead of trying to cut corners, which is what they've been doing ever since they moved off of Teddy Bridgewater following the 2020 season. And I get it. Teddy wasn't great, but have they made any good decisions at the quarterback position since then? No.
No.
And have they made any great roster decisions since then? No. So at some point in time, you just got to eat it, build the roster, and give the quarterback, whoever you bring in at the end of the day, who you think's the guy, a fighting chance. So that's, I guess, what's next. They're right back to square one. And quite honestly, Adam, we've seen how the last 4 years have played out. Don't have a lot of confidence that the next 4 years are going to play out any better.
No, it's this is the one time in the National Football League where you can say a 5-year plan might take 5 years. There's no such thing in the NFL. Teams turn it around really quickly with the right coach and the right draft. Julian Council, I am endorsing you for president of football operations of the Carolina Panthers at Julian Council, Locked On Panthers Podcast.
Can't afford me.
I bet he can. I bet he can. Thanks, man. I appreciate your time always.
Absolutely.
That was awesome.